So I think honestly for us, it's a learning curve. Uh, we first started with musicians, then we started working with comedians. Now we also rep writers and directors. So we've really been learning how to do this. And the expansion into, say, gaming content or even financial literacy content or
Yeah.
even regional language content has been taking the artist lead.
Hello and welcome to Next Big Brand Interviews. We have a very special guest today, Miss Gunjan Arya. Thank you for being here.
Thank
And
you for being here.
Gunjan is the CEO of OML, probably India's and one of the world's biggest artist-first media agencies. And she's under her leadership, the company has had to evolve a lot, and at times not always expectedly so, not always along the expected lines. So she's had to face a lot of challenges in her tenure as a CEO, and we will be talking about all of that, and we will be talking about the changing landscape of uh, artists and changing landscape of the management of all types of content with Ms. Gunjan Arya. Thank you for being here, ma'am. And let's
Of
just
course.
deep dive into the first question. As we all know, OML is a artist first agency. So what kind of an effort, what kind of a strategy goes into management of the artists for this sort of a approach?
So I think it's more than effort, it's actually a conscious decision. When we started about 19 years ago, we said that we actually started out managing musicians and
Yeah,
working with independent musicians that uh, didn't work with record labels back in the day, because record labels were famous for keeping 99 cents on the dollar that for every CD that was sold. And our pitch to artists back then was, hey, release yourself. And luckily for us, that online bet paid off. YouTube is what it is today. I think it's one of the largest music players in the world. And that's really what has always been our driving force and that driving mission, to say, hey, if you put artists at the center of whatever it is that you want to do, like, the rest was built around it. So starting with the artist management team, then we added a content production team. Back in the day, used to build music videos for those artists.
yeah,
Today builds shows for the likes of Amazon Prime Video, Netflix, Hotstar, etc. Then there was a live team that we started, which was again because, hey, these artists need to find stage time and
yeah,
opportunities to showcase their work. And that team now obviously operates at scale and builds, like, for example, the Bacardi N87 Weekender, which is one of the largest music festivals in the country. So we've been sort of adding skill sets to the team.
yeah,
Every time we saw that there was an evolution in the way artists could expand their income sets, we went after that and built teams and expertise on the back of that. So it's more a driving mission. That isn't to say that there aren't other live companies that are not artist first. There are enough companies, for example, on the brand side as well, that are global establishments almost. But that's what honestly sets OML aside. We'd always have the artist's interest first at hand.
yeah. So when we say artist first, and in the current landscape, we are seeing how content expansion is happening, wherein we are going from outside the mainstream languages in India, so to speak, the Hindi and English, to a more regional subset. And this
Mhm.
is something that OML has also been doing. The addition of regional language artists from across the country. So, if
Right.
you could speak to the idea of what that approach was and how has it been going so far?
So I think honestly for us, it's a learning curve. Uh, we first started with musicians, then we started working with comedians. Now we also rep writers and directors. So we've really been learning how to do this. And the expansion into, say, gaming content or even financial literacy content or
Yeah,
even regional language content has been taking the artist lead. So a lot of times we have artists who come back to us and say, hey, this is going to be interesting. Let's try doing something here. Or, hey, we see that our fans are also consuming this type of content online and
okay,
therefore interesting for us to build on. So we're honestly just following up on the cues of those that know this audience best, and that is the artists themselves.
Okay, okay. But there must have been a conscious shift in terms of the backroom decision making, wherein you wanted to focus a little more on the regional thing, because, like I said, there is a shift happening in the content landscape at the moment, wherein a lot of brands, a lot of companies are going beyond the maybe the two main languages in the country, the two bigger, so to speak, languages in the country. So,
So
what was that
I honestly
conflict?
think, I think the landscape shift is coming into play now because of two things. One is how is content consumed. Most content in India is consumed on the cell phone,
Yeah.
and then second is that those who have access to content now also have the privilege of choosing what type of content. So back in the day when you would spend your big media monies on channels, on TV channels with high reach, you didn't have a choice of customizing. But today
Yeah.
with social media platforms, algorithms allowing you to choose as a user, as well as having your own individual device in your hand, that those two coupled together put the play of going with regional, going with different types of content, branching out into different types of consumption patterns. So for example, we did a stream with Red Bull a few weeks ago, and it was a Valorant tournament that was streamed in 8 different languages, and we saw considerable reach across all of them, with obviously Hindi being number one, but then very close in a third and a fourth were languages like Tamil.
Yeah.
Because you know that today audiences are consuming content in those languages, and you want to be present where audiences are present.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. So when like I mentioned, brands are also branching out, and when we talk about today's content generation landscape, when you talk about the artists, you're not only talking about your big artists, or artists who've like gone on to hit a huge number set or whatever. We are also talking the up and coming, the micro, the mini influencers of sorts, the smaller creators. So what do you what kind of an approach does OML take when you're working with a brand, and that creating that synergy between the brand and the creator, and what kind of a identification goes on there?
Sure. So I think about 3 or 4 years ago, we actually set up a very deep media and analytics practice. This practice goes into the back end of most artists. We understand their consumption patterns, and that's what we use to then predict success for the
Yeah.
future. So, for example, understanding what the current audience base is that an artist caters to, and can they look at reaching lookalike audiences? Or, for
Okay.
example, can you promote that to friends of those that are already fans of a certain artist, and therefore grow the audience base that an artist can potentially reach out to? So, one is that, right? Second
Okay.
is using the same understanding to help brands reach audiences that would be interested in that message. So, customizing at that level as well. And this now has multiple use cases across the board. So it's about predicting success for any social media campaigns, whether done by a brand, whether done by an artist, or then even done by, say, a platform. And we're working with all of them across the board.
Okay. Um, like you said, you've worked with quite a few platforms already in creating content, and with in collaboration with the artists and the OTT platforms. Um, what goes on in this collaboration, when you talk about a collaboration with an OTT platform, especially in the last 1.5 years, that's just taken off. And maybe till about 2019, the focus and the audience gaze wasn't that high in terms of uh, in terms of the expectation and all. But in the last 1.5 years, it's obviously grown and hit massive numbers. So what kind of a shift are you seeing there, and what kind of a strategy goes on in creating different content pieces for different OTT platforms and with different artists?
I think if you're speaking specifically about the last 1.5 years, I think we can all either blame or thank the pandemic.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's obviously been the defining force of changing a lot of content consumption patterns and a lot of expectations. Um, but even when it comes to working with platforms, they have a very clear sense of what is the kind of audiences that they're targeting, what kind of shows have worked. They obviously have collective information across how content patterns are changing across the globe. Different countries behaving slowly, some picking up from here. I think I was just reading today that for a lot of platforms, content generated in India is the highest viewed content on the platform globally outside of content generated in the US. So I think they obviously have a lot more understanding of what audiences are looking for, and I'm sure a bit of that filters into the kind of projects that they commission. But
Yeah.
outside of that, I think it's just the privilege of being able to tell the stories that have not yet seen light of day till now. And that's really why we look to platforms to be able to tell these stories that wouldn't otherwise make it to the silver screen or wouldn't make it to TV otherwise.
Okay. Okay. We spoke about the OTT. An extension of sorts of the OTT platform is what Mini TV and all, and OML is starting to collaborate with Mini TV as well. So, what kind of a prospect do you see for that particular platform, for that particular set?
Are you talking specifically about AWOD content? Mini
Yeah,
TV is an example
yeah,
of AWOD? Okay.
yeah,
So I think AWOD is honestly a natural progression. For most media companies, there are only two ways to make money. Yeah, so there's subscription, yeah, there's sponsorship, right?
yeah,
Subscription is for us on the event side, it's either selling tickets, or for platforms, it's selling, your monthly packages, yearly packages. And then sponsorship mein there are two. Yeah, so you carry media messages or you carry brand communication in the form of advertising, or then you intercut it with ad breaks, right? We
yeah.
saw YouTube go from one ad to two ads before each content piece plays. You're going to see the likes of, Amazon Prime Video follow. Um, it's honestly, like I said, a natural extension. I won't be surprised if other platforms launch it sooner as well. I think our understanding is that Mini TV is an opportunity for Amazon to start linking it to the content side,
Okay.
so linking the content and the commerce side, which is why it's a part of Amazon.com. And honestly, we're all waiting to see where it goes.
So, when the content creation for something like this, does it change drastically, or like similar principles apply with just a few minor tweaks?
I think it depends on what you think who your audience is and what is it that they're looking for. And I'm sure the only way to know is to experiment with a bunch of different formats and see which one sticks. And we've been part of that journey with several platforms.
You mentioned the tickets and selling tickets, and also that gives us a very natural leeway into the next one. The live event space. OML has been a huge part of it since its inception in India with NH7 Weekender and all. And last year you had to take that event online. And I'm pretty sure you at that time you and the entire company was of the thought that okay, this is the one time we'll be doing this. Hopefully by next year we'll be back to our regular regular ways. But I don't think that is happening anytime soon because uh, second wave we've apparently just crossed and third is about to come. So to like that's what people are predicting for the experts. So what do you think? Where do you think the live event space is going in India right now and the world?
So I honestly don't know what stands for the live event space in the short term, but in the
Hmm.
long term, I'm pretty sure that nothing replaces that experience of standing in front of a stage and listening to your favorite artist live.
Yeah.
Um, and everything else that we have available to us as options at the moment, at least, feels suboptimal. Obviously, we did our best with translating Weekender into a digital experience last year, and fans appreciated it. And we saw that appreciation in many forms, whether it was the record numbers that showed up, whether it was the kind of comments we got, all of that, right? Um, but I think there is an opportunity for live events to create, at least in the next 1 to 2 year horizon, opportunities for safe, distanced events where you are able to control audiences. And it's only under that pretext would we ever go back on ground.
Yeah, because speaking about the NH7 weekend that happened online, it had a lot of cool features. Obviously, you tried to replicate the event as much as you could, technology allowing. Um, do you think technologies like VR and AR, do you think those technologies can boost the live event space if it is to be online for a slightly longer duration than what we are at least hoping for?
I honestly think that the only way to make AR and VR, so AR and VR definitely have potential, right? They offer
Yeah.
a lot more than watching a passive viewing experience, which is what we tried
True.
to change with the platform that Insider built last year for the
Yeah.
Bacardi N7 Weekender. So you could swap between stages. You had the Bacardi stage, you had the Breezer Vivid stage. You could so all of those experiences of watching it live and in person. Or you had the global chat feature where you could talk to people. Or, for example, a big part of going to a music festival is crowd watching. And you had the opportunity to upload a 15-second video of you watching it at home.
Yeah.
Um, so all of those features, yes, can be built into a digital experience. Uh, but it is only useful if you have a certain number of people in the audience who are able to use those features, right?
Yeah.
My biggest concern with AR and VR is that today they don't exist at scale. So folks with VR headsets, who are able to access AR content, we're happy to build it out. But there's only so much you can build without people having opportunities to consume it.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Very fair. Let's move to the next set where the newest addition to the OML family, the gaming events,
Right.
and OML getting into the gaming space after music, then comedy, and now gaming. Uh, if you could tell us a bit more about the thought that went on behind that and creating the gaming events and all.
Sure. So I think for us, we've always sort of been married to subcultures, right? The idea of, for example, hip hop. There's only a hip hop artist who can speak true to his or her experiences. And that's what rapping allowed a whole generation of Indian artists who didn't have, say, access to a guitar. A guitar is really, really expensive. Therefore, you only had, uh, you know, middle class or upper class kids getting into music as a profession. But
Yeah,
hip hop opened that up as an opportunity. And I think that's always been our thing, to look at budding communities and say, hey, is there something that we can do here and help these artists grow and become either more mainstream, figure out how to make a livelihood out of this artistic expression. And that's really where our interest in gaming comes from as well. We see a lot of young kids who are taking to the internet to stream gaming content, and they have sizable communities that they're growing today. Is there an opportunity for us to get in there and find a way to make it sustainable? I think that's always been our the filter that we apply, and it's the same with gaming.
okay. So do you think the gaming content generation in India, I mean, online gaming is obviously starting to pick up when you talk about building games in India, but most of your games are still coming from abroad, even though a lot of times the teams are like built up with Indian techies and all. So do you think the gaming content development in India is something that will pick up anytime soon?
I wouldn't be surprised if it does. There's always going to be two aspects, right? One is, who are you catering to? The more Indian kids start gaming and they form sizable communities, game publishers will have to recognize our audience. And the best way to recognize our audience is to make custom content for that audience. So that is one, right? And the other is, if you look at the kind of talent India is able to produce, it will be a matter of time before we're using a lot more Indian talent to build games for the Indian landscape.
So when we talk about the brand moving from, let's say, music, then comedy to gaming, what kind of a strategy build up goes into going into one industry after the other? I mean, yes, like you said, the core remains still the same in terms of focusing on the people that you're working with, making sure that those people come first. But obviously, a musician, in terms of his or her approach to things, is very different from, let's say, a gamer, a young kid who's just started gaming and he's getting a lot more traction than he could have imagined. So, what kind of a shift goes from different industries, and to make sure that, okay, everybody is working in the same direction, everybody is going in the same direction as a brand.
So you're right in saying that when catering to a musician or a gamer, their craft is different, which I absolutely agree with. And there we, like I said earlier, we always defer to the artist in question because they know their craft better than any of us, right? But to me, the art part of it is when you're able to impact audiences. And that remains the same because, like I said earlier, media remains the same. You have X number of opportunities to be seen or to be heard by your fans. And how is it that you monetize those opportunities, whether through an OTT platform deal or through a brand endorsement deal or through branded content on your YouTube stream? All of those will always remain the same. And for us, I think it's more about taking the learnings as we go along and just applying it more often and in different places. So
Okay.
the philosophy and the strategy remains the same um, when it comes to making sure that the art reaches more people. But when it comes to the craft, it's honestly the artist is the best person to answer that.
Okay. Okay. Um, you mentioned financial literacy and the financial literacy content earlier in the conversation. Um, what was the idea behind that? I mean, I know as of this moment it's more internal, and but there are artists who are going out, and especially in the last 1 year, financial literacy has really picked up in terms of being a content space. So, where do you think that is coming from, and where do you think that is going?
So I think there are three or four reasons, but at the top, I'd like to say that this actually comes from Tanmay and his understanding of his audiences. The
Okay.
second is that there are a lot more people at home with a lot more time on their hands. Added to which, in the US, everyone got extra money this year. So they all got $1,200, and then I think $1,600 in their bank accounts as a COVID relief measure.
Yeah.
Everybody had extra money. They wanted to know what to do with that money, and for the first time, they also had the time to figure out what to do with that money. Otherwise, I think when we're all spending 2 hours on the road to hit that 1 hour long meeting, none of us really have the energy or the time to figure out what to do with our finances. But for the first time in history, you have money and you have time both. So you obviously want to know what to do with it. The third is obviously the stock markets have not been a reflection of reality whatsoever. They've been
Yeah.
going through the charts. So there is interest given all these things.
Okay.
Coupled with, I think, what we did internally starting last year was financial literacy workshops for our teams, because our advice to them was, hey, if this is the year you're going to be at home, and we're going to give you enough notice before office opens again. So if you can save money on rent in Bombay, please do. If it
Yeah.
means moving back with your parents or whatever that is. But also know what to do with that money, because we're not doing pay cuts. You have the same amount of money. You're not going out as much. You're probably saving on rent as well. So you be wise with that money. And I think that's what really started the financial literacy workshops internally at OML last year. And we've seen that it's not just our it's not just our teens, but pretty much everyone in this age bracket is becoming more close to their decisions of how they save and spend money.
Okay, okay. And I also think there's a, a grown awareness, so to speak, a grown
Yeah,
awareness of the fact that we've not been taught this ever in our lives. I
yeah,
mean, to be fair, I'm almost 30 right now, and I only started actually thinking about these things maybe in the last 5, 6 years, and I actually got into the business end of things. Before
sure,
that, personally speaking, I also didn't really know much because
sure.
when we're talking about it in schools and all, you don't really get that sort of a education or that sort of awareness.
Yeah,
So
you're right. You're right. And um, in our country, it's almost legal to be, it's legal to be married by 18. It's you can go vote, you can drive, you can do all of these things. But if you ask somebody the difference between TDS and TCS, they won't know what you're talking about. Um, so yes, I definitely believe there is a gap there. And the other thing is, I feel like our audience is a lot more open to talking about things that maybe our parents' generation would shy away from. So whether it's things like, menstrual health or sexual health or money, like all of these things come very naturally to our audiences to be open about. In fact, there's a service in the US called Venmo where you can send people money, and so it's nothing but, hey, if you and I say go out to dinner and I owe you money, I'm going to Venmo you X amount of money, right? And
yeah,
most of the kids that I know below 30 in the US are on it, and they use it very liberally. And it's become a whole other social ecosystem. And the most striking feature about Venmo is that it's open for everyone to see. Whereas and you can imagine, Sujay, in our cultures where if we ever owed someone money, first of all, we'd all be hush hush about it, or we'd slip an
yeah.
envelope below the table or say, hey, I owed this to you, I'm going to drop it off. And it's going to be like wrapped in a sealed envelope. No one is going to know what's inside. It is a completely private conversation
Yeah,
versus having a platform like Venmo where everyone knows what transactions you've made and can see other people giving each other money and how much.
that probably just opens things up a little, and I
Absolutely.
think India is also getting there slightly in terms of our uh, in terms of our content consumption and in terms of our practices around that said content. So about that itself, so as as a brand that has been that's probably seen pretty much every stage of online content in India, pretty much like, and the the biggest of the biggest of sectors in that online content space as well. So where do you think the consumption is going? What kind of a behavioral change? To be honest, it is changing every couple of years and drastically at that. Where do you think that is going next? Where do you think what is happening now?
I think the journey that we're already on is just going to get more and more magnified. And by that, I mean what we discussed earlier, which is, hey, everyone has a cell phone in their hands and everyone is deciding what they want to watch. Your news feed and your timeline is very different from my news feed and my timeline. Whereas, we're like two similar aged folks dialing in from the same country. That would have not been the case with, 20 years ago, where you and I only had Doordarshan to watch on a Sunday, and both of us probably watched Mahabharata. Like it was the same thing, right? Lekin abhi that's not the case anymore. So you're choosing what you want to watch. I'm choosing what I want to watch. And I think that brings us down to the fact that sooner or later, we're all going to be catering to audiences of one.
Okay.
And I think that's really important to know and to keep in mind whenever we make broadcasting decisions.
But when you say audience of one, but don't you think that then the consumption pattern, let's say
Hmm.
it's when we talk about consumption patterns, the attention spans and the time spent on a particular content piece is also getting lower and lower by the minute. Don't you
So I
think when
think
you
yes or no, I don't think that's the case, and I feel like more people have more options to choose from, and that's what I mean by audiences of one. So, for example, people stream for hours, That is somebody consuming gaming content as well as streaming gaming content. And that's not, short form content. Yes, short form content has its own place. And you will see that on, YouTube stories to WhatsApp stories to, obviously, I'm not even going to talk about Instagram reels, etc. Wo to hai hi,
Yeah.
right? So there is always going to be short form content, and there will be different ways that in which they fill up the micro gaps in our day. But then there will also be long form content, and it really depends on what that content is to hold your attention for longer periods of time.
No, but when I say it's reducing, I'm talking about the boom of these reels and your TikToks and other platforms. It's growing. It's only growing. And when we also see, personally speaking, I've been in the content space for about 5 6 years now.
Hmm.
When I talk something as basic as an article, I
Hmm.
mean, when we put out an article, let's say 1500 words, a deep analytical piece, and as compared to that, you put out a listicle, let's say top five, this or that,
Hmm.
500 words and done. You'll see, even though there is more value, so to speak, in the longer form content piece, the engagement you get on a shorter form is increasing. Like it, when I
Yes.
first got into this, it wasn't the case, but in the last couple of years, it is increasing, and there is a, like, if you are to chart that graph, it is only going up. So do you think that is a credible risk to the longer form content, or do you think they can coexist?
So again, like I said, I think it depends on the creative value of the content piece itself. Um, So, just for the purpose of an example, I'm going to take exactly what you said, right? Which is it's a long form piece which goes into, it's an explanation, right?
Yeah.
It shares pros and cons, etc. Now, something like that requires X amount of effort from your audience versus a listicle, which is really easy to scan through. I've grasped it, I'm going to move on. One is that. Second is, if that same explanation were to be made into, like, do you think there's enough material in there for it to become a 20-minute long explainer video? Because those are also doing well on YouTube. I think it's about understanding what your audience wants out of that piece and how much effort is it willing to contribute to that. So I don't think there's a one rule sort of fits all. Um, but yes, as an audience member, if today I have an option between watching a 5 second video and reading a 10-page article, I'm probably going to opt for the 5 second video. It's also because the options and the choices around me are making me lazy. The second is that if I really need to study something and there is a 20-minute long YouTube video available to explain it to me, and if it does it well, then I'm probably going to opt for that. I don't know if you remember that shift, but there was in the middle where all Facebook videos started closed captioning.
Yeah.
So even when you're scrolling on mute, you can already see the captions, right? That is again an effort in making sure that we are making this platform more and more convenient for you. So I think as somebody, as a media producer, and you being the media producer who's put out that 1500-word article, you need to keep in mind how is your audience going to consume this data and what is it that you really want them to get out of it.
So that brings me to my next this thing. What do you think is the next big thing in this space, in the in the collaborative content space and the whole artist artist space? What do you think is the next big thing? What do you think is something that people
I
should
think
watch
we're
out for?
honestly just scratching the surface of the creator economy.
Yeah.
Going forward, you're going to see a lot more definitive creators who become media empires in themselves. And I won't be surprised if in a year or two you have that in a country like India itself, where you have a creator who has multiple channels, multiple revenue sources, and they have audiences that they command.
I think that's already happening. I think that shift that you're talking about. There are a couple of people, there are a couple of brands that are already doing that in terms of multiple multiple channel mediums and all. So
Absolutely. But I think it's just, we're just
yeah,
at the beginning of that. I think
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
lot
yeah.
more of this coming.
So Just one last thing, and I think we're very close to your heart stop. Um,
Sorry.
what is your what is your one big hope for the industry over the next 5 years, let's say?
Wow, that's a tough one. I wish I was prepared for that. Um, but for me, I think it would be staying closer to audiences. I really hope that artists learn how to read audiences better and are able to just build in that stickiness, which is really what's going to lead to what we were talking about earlier, where creators become media economies, or sorry, media conglomerates in
Yeah.
themselves.
Okay. Okay. That's a nice one. That's a nice one to sign off on. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for
Thanks.
doing this. This was a very informative and insightful conversation, and I hope the live events go back, and I hope that your hope of your hope of creators understanding the audience better and the whole uh, talking to people rather than talking at people becomes more of a involved thing. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time out and doing this. And I hope
Thanks.
you like this. I hope you like the conversation.
I did. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.